Did you know that Georgia was the place where the gold rush in the United States began, even before California? That its swamps are home to one of the most mysterious and ancient ecosystems in the country, and that one of the world's most famous brands was born in a small pharmacy in Atlanta and went on to conquer the entire planet? Coca-Cola! Georgia is not just about peaches and southern hospitality. It's deep history, mystery, and innovation. Get ready, because today you'll discover 35 incredible facts about Georgia that will completely change the way you see the heart of the American South. 35. The ancient roots of the Blue Ridge. The Blue Ridge Mountains are essentially the grandfathers of the mountain world, standing as a testament to the sheer endurance of the earth. While many travelers often rave about the sharp, jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains in the western United States, those peaks are practically toddlers in geological years compared to what we have in Georgia. The Blue Ridge Range began its formation over 1 billion years ago, placing it among the oldest mountain systems on the entire planet. To give you a bit of perspective on that timeline, these mountains were already incredibly ancient when the first dinosaurs were just beginning to walk the earth. Over hundreds of millions of years, they have been weathered down by relentless rain, wind, and ice, which is exactly why they possess those iconic soft rolling curves instead of the sharp, aggressive edges seen in the Himalayas. 34. A European comparison of grand proportions. One thing I have noticed during my travels is that people often underestimate just how massive the individual states in the United States really are. Georgia is a perfect example of this deceptive scale. When you look at the numbers, Georgia covers approximately 59,000 square miles of land and water. To put that into a global context that makes it feel real, Georgia is actually larger than the entire countries of England and Wales combined. If you were to take the state and drop it into the middle of Europe, it would be a major territorial player. You could drive for 8 hours from the northern mountain border down to the coast and still find yourself within the same state lines, which is a distance that would take you through multiple different countries in other parts of the world. Before continuing, be sure to subscribe and leave a like to keep discovering the strange and incredible geography of our entire country. 33. The dual destination of swamp waters. The Okefenokee Swamp is one of the most mysterious and beautiful places I have ever paddled through, but its geography is even more fascinating than its resident alligators. Most people assume that a swamp is just a stagnant pool of water, but the Okefenokee is actually a massive, slowly moving tea-colored river system. What makes it truly unique is that it sits on a subtle continental divide. Because of the way the land slopes ever so slightly, the water that falls into the swamp has two completely different destinies. About 90% of the water drains out through the Suwannee River, which flows westward and eventually empties into the Gulf of Mexico. The remaining 10%, however, flows out through the St. Mary's River to the east, making its way into the Atlantic Ocean. This means that a single rainstorm in the swamp can send water on two journeys to two different sides of the continent. It is one of the few places in the world where a single wetland serves as the headwaters for two major river systems flowing in opposite directions. 32. The industrial memory of the fall line. If you look at a map of Georgia, you might notice a string of major cities like Augusta, Milledgeville, Macon, and Columbus stretching across the middle of the state. This is not a coincidence. It is the result of a geographic feature called the fall line. This line represents the ancient prehistoric shoreline of the Atlantic Ocean from millions of years ago. It is the point where the hard, hilly rocks of the Piedmont region drop off into the soft, sandy soil of the coastal plain. For early settlers and traders, this was a literal wall. Boats traveling upriver from the coast could only go as far as the fall line before hitting rapids and waterfalls, forcing them to stop and unload their goods. This natural bottleneck is exactly why those cities were built where they are. 31. The accidental Grand Canyon of the South. Providence Canyon is often called Georgia's Little Grand Canyon, and while it is breathtakingly beautiful with its vibrant orange, pink, and purple soil layers, its origin story is a bit of a cautionary tale. Unlike the Grand Canyon in Arizona, which took millions of years of river erosion to form, Providence Canyon was created in less than 200 years as a direct result of poor farming practices. Back in the early 1800s, farmers cleared the native forests and did not use proper contour plowing or erosion control. A small ditch began to form, and because the underlying soil was so soft and sandy, the rainwater quickly carved out massive gullies. Today, those gullies are over 150 feet deep and cover over 1,000 acres. It is a stunning example of how quickly human activity can permanently alter the physical geography of a region. It is now a beautiful state park, but it serves as a massive, colorful scar on the landscape that reminds us of the delicate balance between land use and preservation. 30. The hidden magnitude of the tidal shoreline. When you look at a general map of the United States, Georgia's coastline looks surprisingly short, especially compared to its neighbors like Florida or South Carolina. In fact, if you measure the coast in a straight line from border to border, it is only about 100 miles long. However, geography is rarely a straight line, because Georgia's coast is filled with deep sounds, winding tidal rivers, sprawling salt marshes, and intricate barrier islands. The actual length of the tidal shoreline is staggering. When you follow every curve and bend of the water's edge, the coastline expands from a mere 100 miles to over 2,300 miles. This makes it one of the most complex and biologically productive coastal ecosystems in the country. 29. A 4-state vista from the highest peak. If you want to feel like you are on top of the world in the south, you have to visit Brasstown Bald. At 4,784 feet above sea level, it is the highest point in the state of Georgia. I have stood on many summits, but the view from this one is particularly special because of its unique geographical position. On a clear day, the 360-degree observation deck allows you to look out and see the rolling blue ridges of 4 different states simultaneously. You can clearly see the mountains of North Carolina to the north, the peaks of Tennessee to the northwest, and the high country of South Carolina to the east, all while standing firmly on Georgia soil. 28. The massive monolith that is not actually granite. Stone Mountain is famous for being one of the largest single exposed masses of rock in the world, rising over 800 feet above the surrounding flat landscape. Most people, including many locals, will tell you that it is a giant piece of granite. However, if you want to be geologically precise, it is actually composed of a rock called quartz monzonite. While it looks very similar to granite, the chemical and mineral makeup is slightly different. This massive stone is what geologists call a pluton, which is a bubble of molten magma that pushed up toward the surface but solidified deep underground about 300 million years ago. Over millions of years, the softer soil and rock on top were eroded away by the elements, leaving this giant hard stone core exposed for us to see today. 27. The living relics of the Spanish missions. Cumberland Island is a place that feels like it has been frozen in time, and its most famous residents are the wild horses that roam its beaches and maritime forests. These are not native animals, but rather the descendants of horses brought over by Spanish explorers and missionaries in the 1500s. For nearly 5 centuries, these horses have survived and adapted to the harsh coastal environment without any help from humans. They have become a permanent part of the island's geography, influencing the way the dunes and marshes grow by grazing on the local vegetation. It is a surreal experience to be walking along a remote, undeveloped beach and see a herd of horses galloping through the surf. They represent a living link to the very beginning of European exploration in the Americas. 26. The deepest gorge in the eastern United States. In the northeastern corner of the state lies Tallulah Gorge, a spectacular canyon that is 2 miles long and nearly 1,000 feet deep. It is often cited as one of the deepest and most dramatic canyons in the eastern United States. The gorge was carved out by the Tallulah River over millions of years as it sliced through the hard quartzite rock of the Tallulah Dome. What makes this place geologically significant is the sheer verticality of its walls. In many places, the drop from the rim to the riverbed is nearly instantaneous. In the late 19th century, it was such a popular tourist destination that it was known as the Niagara of the South. Even today, the gorge creates its own microclimate. The bottom of the canyon stays much cooler and more humid than the rim, allowing rare plants like the persistent trillium to grow there and nowhere else on Earth. 25. The geographic crown of the East. There is a long-standing debate about which state is the largest east of the Mississippi River, and the answer actually depends on how you measure it. If you are looking strictly at land area, Georgia takes the crown, while Michigan has more total area if you count the massive portions of the Great Lakes that fall within its borders. Georgia has more actual solid ground than any other state in the eastern half of the country. This is a fact that Georgians are quite proud of. This large landmass is why the state can accommodate such a wide variety of geographic regions, from the high Blue Ridge Mountains in the north, down through the Piedmont Plateau, and into the vast coastal plain that reaches the sea. Having more land area means more room for diverse ecosystems, varied agricultural zones, and a vast network of rivers that all originate within the state's own borders. It truly is the geographic giant of the East. 24. The shifting foundations of the Golden Isles. One of the most fascinating things about the Georgia coast is that it is never truly in the same place twice. The barrier islands, famously known as the Golden Isles, are not permanent stationary landmasses. Instead, they are part of a highly dynamic system where the islands are actually migrating westward toward the mainland. This happens because of a process called longshore drift and the constant battering of Atlantic waves. As the ocean pushes against the eastern shores, sand is eroded from the northern ends of the islands and deposited on the southern ends, while the entire chain slowly inches closer to the coast. This means that the beaches you walk on today are geographically different from the ones visited by travelers just a century ago. 23. The Brever Fault Line, hidden in plain sight. You might think of fault lines as something only people in California have to worry about, but Georgia has a massive one that has shaped the state's entire landscape. The Brever Fault Zone is a long, narrow band of crushed rock that stretches from Alabama through the heart of Atlanta and up into North Carolina. While it is not a source of major earthquakes today, its geographical impact is undeniable. The most prominent feature it created is the path of the Chattahoochee River. If you look at a map, you will notice the river flows in a remarkably straight line for miles. That is because it is literally following the weakened, eroded rock along the fault line. 22. The record-breaking height of Amicalola Falls. When people talk about waterfalls in the eastern United States, they often bring up the famous spots in North Carolina or the massive power of Niagara. However, Georgia holds its own with Amicalola Falls, which is the tallest cascading waterfall in the southeast. Tumbling down a total of 729 feet, it is a staggering sight to behold. To put that in perspective, that is nearly 5 times the height of Niagara Falls. The name itself comes from a Cherokee word meaning tumbling waters, and the geography of the area is perfect for such a spectacle. The water falls over a series of steep crystalline rock ledges within the Amicalola Falls State Park. 21. The isolated stone islands of the Piedmont. As you travel through the rolling hills of the Georgia Piedmont, you might stumble upon massive isolated domes of rock like Panola Mountain or Arabia Mountain. These are known as monadnocks, which is a geological term for a mountain of hard, erosion-resistant rock that stands alone on a relatively flat plain. I like to think of them as stone islands in a sea of red clay. What makes these spots geographically unique is their ecology. Because the rock surfaces are so harsh and exposed, they have developed vernal pools, small depressions that fill with rainwater and support incredibly rare plant species like the bright red diamorpha. These plants cannot be found anywhere else in the world except on these specific Georgia rock outcrops. It is a miniature, specialized world that has survived for thousands of years right on the granite surface, completely separate from the forests surrounding them. 20. The Amazon of the American South. The Altamaha River is often referred to by geologists and biologists as the Amazon of the South, and for a very good reason. It is one of the largest and most pristine river systems on the Atlantic coast, and it is entirely contained within the state of Georgia. What makes its geography so special is the lack of dams. Unlike almost every other major river in the United States, the Altamaha flows relatively unimpeded from its source to the sea. This creates a massive, fertile delta that supports an incredible amount of biodiversity, including ancient sturgeon and rare species of mussels. The sheer volume of fresh water it dumps into the Atlantic Ocean creates a unique brackish environment in the coastal sounds that acts as a massive nursery for the entire region's marine life. 19. The forgotten heart of Twiggs County. Every state has a geographic center, but Georgia's is tucked away in a place many travelers drive right past without a second thought. If you head to Twiggs County, about 18 miles southeast of Macon, you will find the official center of the Peach State. Specifically, it is located near the town of Jeffersonville. I have always found it fascinating how these central points are determined. It is essentially the balance point where the state would sit level if you could balance the entire landmass on a single pin. While there is not a massive monument there, the geography of the area is a perfect representation of Middle Georgia, where the hilly Piedmont officially shakes hands with the flat coastal plain. 18. The deep blue miracle of Radium Springs. In the southern city of Albany, there is a geographical wonder that looks like something out of a dream. Radium Springs is one of the 7 natural wonders of Georgia, and it is powered by an underground cavern that pumps out 70,000 gallons of water per minute. The water stays at a consistent 68 degrees year-round and possesses a striking crystal clear blue hue. The name comes from the trace amounts of radium found in the water, which led to the site becoming a major luxury resort in the early 20th century. Geologically, it is part of the Floridan Aquifer, one of the most productive aquifer systems in the world. When the water emerges from the deep limestone caves, it creates a lush, subtropical oasis that stands in stark contrast to the surrounding agricultural fields of the Daugherty Plain. 17. The true beginning of the Great Trail. Most people know about the Appalachian Trail, the legendary footpath that stretches all the way to Maine, but the geography of its starting point in Georgia is something quite special. The trail officially begins at the summit of Springer Mountain, located in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Fannin County. What many people do not realize is that getting to the start of the trail is a hike in itself. You have to climb nearly 9 miles from Amicalola Falls just to reach the bronze plaques that mark the southern terminus. The mountain itself sits at an elevation of 3,000 3,782 feet, providing a rugged, high-altitude environment that serves as a fitting introduction to the thousands of miles of wilderness that lie ahead. 16. The subtropical secrets of Sitton's Gulch. Cloudland Canyon State Park is famous for its deep, rugged gorges, but the geography of Sitton's Gulch at the bottom of the canyon is a complete departure from the dry sandstone cliffs above. As you descend the 1,000 steps to the canyon floor, the environment changes from a typical hardwood forest to something that feels almost subtropical. The deep shade of the 1,000-foot walls and the constant moisture from the Daniel Creek waterfalls create a microclimate where ferns and rare wildflowers thrive in the cool, damp air. This deep gash in Lookout Mountain was carved out by water over eons, exposing layers of limestone and shale that are significantly older than the sandstone on the rim. 15. The birthplace of the mighty Chattahoochee. While we often see the Chattahoochee River as a wide, lazy body of water in Atlanta or a massive lake at Lanier, its geographic origin is a tiny, humble spring in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Specifically, the river begins at Jack's Knob in Union County, near the border with Towns County. At its source, the mighty river is nothing more than a small trickle of cold water emerging from the earth at an elevation of over 3,000 feet. From this single point, the water embarks on a 430-mile journey that defines the western border of Georgia and provides the primary drinking water for millions of people. 14. The abyssal depth of the Fantastic Pit. For those who prefer their geography to be vertical and underground, Georgia is home to one of the most incredible caves in the world. Ellison's Cave, located on Pigeon Mountain in Walker County, contains the deepest unobstructed vertical pit in the lower 48 states. Known as the Fantastic Pit, it is a staggering 586 feet deep. To put that in perspective, you could drop the entire Washington Monument into this hole, and it would still have room to spare. The cave system itself is over 12 miles long and reaches depths of over 1,000 feet below the surface. This is a result of the unique karst topography of northwest Georgia, where slightly acidic rainwater has spent millions of years dissolving the limestone bedrock to create massive subterranean voids that are as terrifying as they are beautiful. 13. The smallest province with the biggest views. Georgia is divided into 5 distinct geographic provinces, and the smallest of these is the Appalachian Plateau, located in the very northwestern corner of the state. Despite its tiny size, covering only about 1% of the state's total area, it offers some of the most dramatic geography in the region. This area, which includes Lookout Mountain and Sandstone Mountain, is characterized by high, flat-topped plateaus separated by deep, narrow valleys. Unlike the rounded ancient peaks of the Blue Ridge to the east, the Appalachian Plateau is made of sedimentary rock that has been uplifted and then eroded into sharp vertical cliffs. Standing on the edge of these plateaus, you can look out across the Tennessee Valley and see the distinct layers of the Earth's crust that were pushed upward during the formation of the Appalachian Mountains. 12. The hidden meteor crater of Meriwether County. In the rolling hills of Meriwether County, near the small town of Woodbury, lies a geographical secret that is literally out of this world. Geologists have identified what they believe is a massive impact structure, often referred to as the Woodbury Crater. This is not a fresh, deep hole in the ground like you might see in Arizona, but rather an ancient, eroded feature that spans several miles across. Millions of years ago, a massive celestial object slammed into the earth here, fracturing the crystalline rock of the Piedmont and creating a circular depression that is still visible to those who know how to read the landscape. While time and weather have softened its edges and filled it with forest, the unique drainage patterns and the specific types of shocked minerals found in the soil tell the story of a violent cosmic event. 11. The Georgia Bight and the phenomenon of giant tides. If you have ever spent time on the beaches of Florida or North Carolina, you might be used to tides that rise and fall by only 2 or 3 feet. However, Georgia's geography creates a completely different experience. The state sits at the deepest point of a massive inward curve in the Atlantic coastline known as the Georgia Bight. Because the coast curves inward like a giant funnel, the incoming ocean water has nowhere to go but up as it is squeezed into a smaller space. This results in some of the highest tides on the entire east coast of the United States, often reaching heights of 6 to 9 feet twice every single day. I have seen visitors park their cars near the marsh thinking they are safe, only to return and find the tires submerged in salt water. This massive tidal range is the primary reason why Georgia has such expansive salt marshes, as the water can push far inland into the tidal creeks, creating a massive pulsing nursery for the entire ocean's food chain. Remember to subscribe and like to keep learning amazing information about each state in our beautiful country. 10. The Sky Island Rainforest of Clayton. Most people associate the term rainforest with the tropical jungles of the Amazon or the misty woods of the Pacific Northwest, but Georgia actually has its own version in the northeastern corner of the state. The town of Clayton and the surrounding Rabun County are geographically positioned to catch massive amounts of moisture as it blows in from the Gulf of Mexico and hits the high wall of the Blue Ridge Mountains. This orographic lift causes the clouds to dump incredible amounts of water, with some areas receiving over 70 inches of rain annually. This makes it the wettest place in the state and one of the wettest spots in the entire country. The result is a lush, high-altitude environment filled with mossy rocks, towering ferns, and a level of biodiversity that is usually reserved for the tropics. 9. The mysterious origin of the Carolina Bays. Scattered across the coastal plain of Georgia are thousands of mysterious oval-shaped depressions known as Carolina Bays. Despite their name, they are found throughout Georgia, and they are one of the most debated geographical features in the world. Every single one of these bays is perfectly elliptical and aligned in exactly the same direction, pointing toward the northwest. Some are only a few acres in size, while others are large enough to be seen easily from space. For decades, scientists have argued over how they were formed. Some believe they were created by a massive shower of icy comets that struck the Earth during the last ice age, while others think they are the result of ancient wind and wave patterns in shallow lakes. 8. The trembling earth of the Okefenokee peat mats. The Okefenokee Swamp is famous for many things, but its name actually comes from a very specific and strange geographical feature. The word Okefenokee is a Native American term that translates to land of the trembling earth. This is not just a poetic title, it is a literal description of the ground in many parts of the swamp. Because the swamp is filled with thick layers of peat and decaying vegetation, large mats of this material often break loose from the bottom and float on the surface of the water. Over time, grass and even large trees begin to grow on these floating islands. If you were to step onto one of these mats, the entire ground would shake and ripple like a giant waterbed under your feet. I once saw a traveler try to jump on a small patch of grass, only to see a tree 50 feet away start swaying as the entire mat reacted to his weight. 7. The private wilderness of Little St. Simon's Island. While many of Georgia's barrier islands have been developed into bustling resorts or state parks, Little St. Simon's Island remains a geographical anomaly because it is almost entirely wild and privately owned. Covering over 11,000 acres, this island is only accessible by boat and has been preserved in a nearly pristine state for over a century. What makes its geography so special is that it offers a rare glimpse into what the entire Georgia coast looked like before human intervention. It contains massive maritime forests of ancient live oaks draped in Spanish moss, sprawling salt marshes, and 7 miles of completely undeveloped beach. Because it has never been cleared for large-scale agriculture or housing, the natural succession of the island's ecosystems remains intact. I have spent time there watching the natural migration of the dunes and the way the forest slowly reclaims the sand, providing a living laboratory for how coastal geography functions when left to its own devices. 6. The river that changes its identity at the border. There is a beautiful, rushing river in the mountains of North Georgia that undergoes a strange geographical transformation the moment it crosses the state line. In Georgia, it is known as the Toccoa River, a name that comes from the Cherokee word for beautiful. It is famous for its clear water and the long swinging bridge that crosses it. However, if you are paddling or fishing and you cross the invisible line into Tennessee, the very same body of water is suddenly called the Ocoee River. This is not a different stream joining in. It is the exact same river. The Ocoee is legendary among whitewater enthusiasts and was even the site of the Olympic canoe and kayak events in the 1990s. It is quite funny to talk to locals on either side of the border who will passionately defend their name for the river, even though the water flowing past them is identical. It is a perfect example of how human-made boundaries can create a split personality for a single natural feature. 5. The white gold of the Cowlin Belt. Running directly along the fall line in Middle Georgia is a geographical feature that makes the state a global leader in a very specific industry. This is the Cowlin Belt, a massive deposit of pure white clay that was formed millions of years ago when the ancient Appalachian Mountains eroded and washed their minerals down to the prehistoric shoreline. This clay, often called white gold, is incredibly rare in such large quantities and high purity. Georgia produces more kaolin than almost anywhere else on Earth, and it is used in everything from the glossy coating on magazine paper to the ceramics used in space shuttles. When you drive through counties like Washington or Wilkinson, the geography changes dramatically as you see massive open pit mines where the bright white clay contrasts sharply with the deep red earth above it. It is a reminder that the most valuable part of a state's geography is often hidden deep beneath the surface, left behind by oceans that vanished long ago. 4. The sinkhole landscape of the Doherty Plain. In the southwestern corner of Georgia, the geography is defined by a landscape known as the Doherty Plain, which is one of the most active karst regions in the country. Because the underlying bedrock is made of soft, soluble limestone, the entire region is prone to the formation of sinkholes. Over thousands of years, rainwater has slowly dissolved the limestone, creating massive underground caverns. When the roof of one of these caverns collapses, a sinkhole is formed on the surface. These are not always dangerous holes. Many of them have become beautiful, deep blue springs or circular ponds that local residents call lime sinks. This unique geography allows water to drain directly from the surface into the massive Floridan aquifer, making the area incredibly important for the state's water supply. However, it also means the ground is surprisingly fragile, and I have heard stories of farmers waking up to find that a small pond has suddenly appeared in the middle of their peanut fields overnight. 3. The hurricane shield of the coastal curve. The same geographical curve that gives Georgia its massive tides also serves as a natural defensive shield against hurricanes. Because the Georgia coast is concave, meaning it curves inward, most hurricanes traveling up the Atlantic coast tend to stay on a straight path that takes them further out to sea as they pass the state. While Florida and the Carolinas stick out into the ocean like targets, Georgia is tucked back in a protective pocket. This does not mean the state is immune to storms, but it does mean that a direct hit from a major hurricane is statistically much rarer here than in the states to the north and south. The geography of the shallow continental shelf also helps by breaking up the energy of the waves before they reach the shore. I have spoken to many coastal residents who feel a deep sense of gratitude for this specific bend in the earth, which has protected their historic cities and marshes from the full brunt of many of the Atlantic's most powerful storms. 2. The city divided by the Eastern Continental Divide. One of the most significant geographical boundaries in North America runs directly through the middle of the city of Atlanta, and most people drive over it every single day without realizing it. This is the Eastern Continental Divide, a high ridge that determines which way every drop of water will flow. If rain falls on the eastern side of the ridge, it will eventually flow into the Atlantic Ocean. If it falls just a few inches to the west, it will travel toward the Gulf of Mexico. This divide follows a path that runs right through downtown Atlanta and beneath the runways of the Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. I find it incredible that two airplanes sitting on different sides of the same tarmac could be dripping rainwater that will end up thousands of miles apart in completely different oceans. This high ground is exactly why Atlanta was founded where it is. The ridge provided a dry, level path for the original railroads that built the city, proving that geography always dictates the course of human history. 1. The 1 mile error of the 35th parallel. The most fascinating geographical fact about Georgia is a mistake that has lasted for over 200 years and caused endless legal battles. When the northern border of Georgia was being surveyed in the early 1800s, the goal was to set the line exactly on the 35th parallel of north latitude. However, the surveyors of the time made a slight mathematical error using their primitive instruments. As a result, the border was marked about 1 mile south of where it should have been. This tiny mistake had massive consequences because it left the border just short of the Tennessee River. If the line had been drawn correctly, Georgia would have a small piece of the riverbank, giving the state access to one of the largest sources of fresh water in the region. To this day, Georgia lawmakers occasionally bring up the error in hopes of reclaiming that lost mile of land and the water rights that come with it. It is a powerful reminder that even the most solid-looking lines on a map are often the result of human error and the rugged reality of the physical landscape. After learning these 35 facts about Georgia, tell us, which one did you like the most, or which one surprised you the most? Leave it in the comments. Let's see how many of us picked the same fact. And if you think we missed something or want to add your own fun fact, we'd love to hear from you. Your comments help us make every video even better. Also, if you noticed any pronunciation slips here and there, thank you for your patience. We're working hard to get better with every video. And speaking of videos, there's another one on screen right now so you can keep exploring the geography of our beautiful country. But before you go, don't forget to subscribe and give it a like so we can keep learning together. See you in the next one.